Okay, Darren, so we are talking about the business case for accessibility. And why would a company care? Because this does cost money, it does cost resources for someone to make something accessible, at least while you're getting started. So, what can we do to help ensure that companies are making this decision in a sustainable way and not just being reactionary?
Right. We always start with it's a humanitarian thing. Let's all do the right thing. And that's great. But there's also some other reasons. We have really solid business and legal cases for accessibility. Yeah. And let's start with the business case, right? The carrot. That's what, the reasons we want to do this more than the reasons we have to do it. The carrot's always better than the stick. The first thing we want to serve all of our constituents better. People with disabilities are a critical market, both internally and externally. So your colleagues and your clients, your customers. There's over 1 billion people in the world with disabilities, and we have over $1 trillion in spending money. I'm still looking for my portion of that, but I'll get there one of these days. But yeah.
Sure.
But so another big point is about privacy and security, right? When you build apps, is that something you just figure out at the end? We'll make sure that works a little bit?
No, that's something you think about, and it's a major pillar to make sure that you're doing it correctly. Otherwise, tacking it on at the end it's not sustainable.
Not sustainable. And the same way, accessibility needs to be thought of the same way. It needs to be ingrained throughout the entire process, not just something plunked on at the end. And the real point about that is without accessibility, all of my privacy and security goes out the window because I've got to get a family member, a friend, a neighbor to come over and help me pay my bills online, right? That's no good.
You don't want to be handing out your credit card information.
Exactly, especially to somebody like you. What the hell am I? Why would I do that?
So accessibility is, maybe our baseline, and usability, pushing that envelope, making it easier to use, helps everybody, right?
Exactly. Accessibility makes lots of things a lot better. There's all kinds of examples of that out there. Think about you're building a app to be better for a person with low vision. So you want to use some high contrast so they can really see it well. Well, that makes it easier for everybody. Everybody can see it well, either in a bad lighting situation or the sunshine's coming down outside. And, so again, when you're building for that group, you're making it better for everybody. Also think of ease of use. You might want to make your app usable by somebody with a cognitive disability. Well, you make it easier to use by everybody. One thing when I first got into this, working with really smart engineers, is they build apps for really smart engineers, not necessarily for the general public. So that's just something we need to, again, that focus on that ease of use for real humans.
Sure.
There's also some real world examples of this out there in the world, right? Think of something I use a lot, OCR technology, optical character recognition, where you can point your phone at a piece of paper and get the text out of it. Everybody uses that now. My dentist uses that to send me my bill in the morning after I go to the dentist. A couple other things out there. The telephone, probably the most ubiquitous tool that we use now, was invented, 150 years ago by Alexander Graham Bell for people with hearing loss. So it was kind of one of the original hearing aids. Another one that we see every day are curb cuts. Those were invented so people with wheelchairs could get up onto the sidewalk and back down onto the street and vice versa. But everybody uses them. We don't trip over the curb anymore because it's a nice, easy ramp going up. A parent with a child in a stroller has a much easier time with it with a curb cut.
For sure. And, if you go to any sports bar in the country, you'll see closed captions running all the time. So that, if you're in a noisy environment, you can still read what's being said on screen and be able to, use that, see what's going on in the game, see what the announcers are saying, right?
Exactly. So that's mainstream using that. One little known fact, about 80% of the captions out there are used by people without hearing loss. A great example of that.
So we've been, there is legal precedent as well for accessibility, right? And so we need to talk about that too. And, we've been consultants for a long time. We have clients that come to us saying things like, I want to be ADA compliant, right?
Yeah,
they got sued. They want to be ADA compliant.
Right.
What does that mean?
It really doesn't mean what they think it means. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, was established in 1991, and that was before the internet came about and smartphones and all these things we use today. So it really did not address computer technology, information technology like what we're focusing on here. It focused on brick and mortar access to buildings. The curb cuts I mentioned before, ramps up into a building to make it easier to get in. So, you know, its purpose was physical access. So does it apply to what we're talking about, web and apps? Well, some courts say yes, some don't, and it's currently being litigated. Many organizations are advocating to get those rules written down so it's more clear that what we have to do under that law.
So to sum up, the ADA certainly applies to physical buildings, places of public accommodation is what it says, but it's less clear, although we are confident it does apply to technology as well. It does not explicitly call out and have those specific guidelines of
Correct.
what must be done, whereas it might specify all the way down to dimensions of certain things.
Exactly,
for
even
physical
buttons on the
places.
elevator, yeah, things like that, the size of
But
steps.
nothing like that for technology.
Not.
Okay. There are other laws that do specifically say what needs to be done, what needs to be accessible. A relatively new one is the CVAA.
Right. The CVAA, the Communications and Video Accessibility Act. It was established, I think it went into effect in 2016. And it, like you said, it is much more clear than the ADA and what needs to be done. Just in its name, Communications and Video Accessibility Act. So if your app or website has, say, an email part, then that has to be accessible. And almost everybody's got video on their sites right now. So again, that has to be accessible to people with disabilities. Adding the captions you talked about and making sure that the buttons to control that video are usable by me as a blind person. Okay, other thing that really makes this have real teeth is that there are real fines that can be assessed. It's enforced by the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. And as a company, we can be fined up to $1 million per product if it doesn't comply with this law, if that communication and video is not accessible.
Yeah, and this, you were telling me this is really what kickstarted and drove accessibility in Silicon Valley.
Exactly. I was out in Silicon Valley working for Yahoo at that point, and that's really what got us going. That's when our legal department came and said, look, what are we doing about this, right? And so we set up procedures and processes to comply. And it's also, well, I mentioned those fines. They're not going to swoop down and take your app away and make you pay this money right away. They're going to take a look at things, and as long as they see you're making progress or you have a plan in place, they'll give you some time to come back and make it right.
Yeah. So another one we have is the Section 508. This is another one which, depending on what you're doing as a company, you need to be Section 508 compliant, and that's a little bit different. Right?
A little bit different. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, that requires that federal websites, IT, things that face the public need to be accessible. And it was established, I think, 1999 was that went into effect? And it's been updated since then. I think we're up to, I'm not sure what version we're up to right now. But when it was established, because it required if you're selling something to the federal government, it has to be accessible. So we hoped that would carry over and kick in, like you said, with the CVA. And if you're going to build for the federal, you might as well make everything else accessible. And it has had some effect, but it didn't have the real effect that we had hoped, like the CVA seems to be having right now.
And this has just recently been refreshed. There's been a refresh of 508 that does have some more specific guidance for technology as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But we also have Section 504 of the same act, which specifically states that no qualified individual with a disability in the United States shall be excluded from, denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program that receives federal funding, essentially, which generally applies to education.
Exactly. So if you're building something for a school or you're working for a school, you want to consider 504.
Yeah. Okay, so we've been talking about a bunch of laws that apply in the United States, right? But there are international laws as well that are similar, that some of them actually mirror the US laws, some of them are a little bit different. But internationally, there's a lot of different laws that talk about accessibility as well, right?
Exactly. We've got the UK has a law, the EU, Canada has the AODA. There are laws in Australia, Germany, many parts of Asia, Japan, China, Hong Kong. So pretty much everywhere in the developed world, we do have laws that require, to one degree or another, accessibility and usability.
Yeah, and there are, like you said, to one degree or another, different ways that they're applied and different things that they apply to. And actually, there's a site that the W3C maintains with policies that we'll provide a link to, or you can check it out and see what different international laws there are. But point is, there is legal precedent in the US, certainly, and internationally to make accessibility a priority. But one thing that is not a law, but that we hear a lot, is we want to comply to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines.
Right. We want to be WCAG compliant, and that's getting closer to real. And not ADA compliant was a little bit gray, but this is something that people can really point to. Right?
But WCAG is not a law,
No.
and it doesn't require anything. You're not required to be WCAG compliant on its own. But, like for example, the Section 508 refresh now points directly to these WCAG guidelines.
Right.
So WCAG is the de facto standard for accessibility on the web and apps and all of those sorts of things as well. But it's not a law, and that's one thing that is important. It's an important distinction to make as you're figuring out how all of this applies.
Right.
So what is WCAG?
Yeah, WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They were established by the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, in Reston, Virginia, in 1999. And they have been updated periodically, and we're up to version 2.1 right now. So, like you said, it's not a law, but it is a tool we can use in this world. And you mentioned the guidelines, and they follow under a umbrella acronym called POUR, which stands for Perceivable, Operable, Understandable, and Robust.
Yes. So this is, like you said, real guidelines. Those are the principles. All the guidelines and success criteria fall under those four things. So if you are building a website, for example, your website must be, and then there are all of these guidelines and success criteria for it. WCAG is a great tool. It helps guide people towards accessible solutions. It also has a lot of resources around it with sufficient techniques that you can use, very clear examples of things that are not working as it should be, and techniques for remediating those things. So WCAG is a really, really valuable tool, but what's really important is that there are the success criteria, which are basically yes, no answers. Does your website or app do this other thing? And I say website or app because it is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but it's written in such a way that it's kind of technology agnostic.
Right, and the later versions have been more covering mobile and things like that.
That's right. Yeah. So WCAG is extremely important. We'll spend a lot of time on WCAG. But it's important to understand how it fits into the legal landscape, and that it is not a law, but it is a guideline. It's a standard that we can
and
use.
many of those laws we mentioned in the U.S. and internationally do point to WCAG, refer to.
Okay, Darren, I'm a company, and I have decided I'm going to make something accessible. Maybe I got sued, and I'm scrambling to make my products accessible. Is there and I've just done a Google search, and I see that there's a product out there. I just put this little button on my website, and it's going to make everything accessible and fix everything. Is there really an easy button like that we can use? Tell us about that.
Yeah, we all want that magic button, right? But it's not there yet. These tools you mentioned, these automated scanners, they can be very useful, but it's critical to understand their limitations, right? They can tell you that there's some problems there, but they can't exactly fix it for you. And you really need some human input on this. They can certainly augment your testing, but it's a good place to start, but a bad place to finish. Yeah. Usability and accessibility can be complex, and you really need that human intelligence to really augment or work with that AI you're mentioning.
That's right. That's exactly right. And there's automated tools that we use and we will use
Right.
to, like you said, augment what we're doing. And especially early on in the development process, running these scanners to identify issues can be really valuable to save some time. But there really isn't a solution that you can just flip a switch. This is something that does require effort.
No magic button yet. We hope it comes soon, but that's why we're existing here, and that's why we're doing this program.
So wrapping up, Darren, we have established, at least we think we've established, an obvious business case for accessibility with regards to reaching more people, building better products. And there are also some legal implications as well to help motivate us to do the right thing, right? But, this is important, but our philosophy goes a little bit beyond that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Legal compliance is obviously important. We don't want to be sued. We don't want to have the FCC come down on us. But our approach to accessibility, our philosophy is to aim for a much higher bar of real usability. Mm-hmm. Accessibility and legal compliance is, well, can I get the job done? Can I get through it? The real goal up here, the bar up higher, is can I get it done? Can I do it efficiently? And can I compete with my colleagues? And we certainly want to push innovation, but we want to make this a world where I can not only get on that playing field, but I can compete and win.